The American Psychology Association has released a new 2015 report on the violent video games. Based on a thorough review of recent studies, the report concludes that the research demonstrates a consistent relation between violent games used the highlighted aggressive behavior, aggressive cognitions, and aggressive affect, and reduces prosocial behavior, empathy, and the sensitivity to aggression. The APA research review does not mean that the violent video games are the biggest or even a major cause of aggression. Other factors such as family violence, having an anger-prone personality, poverty, harsh parental discipline, peer rejection, and school problems are established risk factors for aggression. It does not mean that video games always cause aggression through thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Instantly, in every child, although the bulk of studies do find a small link between the violent video games and some sort of aggression. There are plenty of studies that fail to find this association or find it only under certain circumstances or for certain people. It definitely does not mean that all kids who play violent video games were turned into mass murderers. For example, we all have friends and know children who play violent video games and are not affected in any way. A friend of mine used to play violent video game all the time when he was a little child, and then he still grew up to be a very calm and non-aggressive person. Few parents are worried about their kids becoming violent criminals. The more relevant question for most parents is, will playing video games make my kid more likely to shove a classmate? The answer is maybe, but not necessarily. According to a clinician, she states that the transfer of behavior from one situation to another does not necessarily happen easily. Children routinely behave differently in different situations. They act differently with their moms versus their dads, at school versus their homes, with friends versus siblings. So to expect that violent behavior in a video game will automatically transfer to a violent behavior offline is inaccurate. Online comments from fans of violent video games typically argue that I have played hundreds of hours of violent games and haven't turned into a murderer. But lack of felonies does not mean violent video games have no effect. Anyone who has ever felt excited, tense, frustrated while playing a video game has been affected by them. Whether they translate into a meaningful real-life outcomes is the issue. Skeptics counter that the observed effects may not be caused by violence. They point out that violent video games are often more challenging, faster paced, and more competitive than the non-violent video games. Studies have found that it was competitiveness of video games rather than how violent they were that predicted later aggressive behavior in their studies. Struggling with a game can lead to frustration and aggression whether or not the game is violent. If any negative effects of playing violent video games disappear quickly, then they may not be important. Research showed that the effect of violent video games on aggressive feelings and aggressive thoughts fades into 4 minutes, and their impact on heart rate and aggressive behavior can last up to 5 to 15 minutes. The effect of violent video games may depend on who is playing them or under what circumstances. Studies argue that people with the personality constellation of being 1. Easily upset, 2. Showing little concern for other people's feelings, 3. Having a tendency to break rules or act without thinking, particularly susceptible to the negative effects of violent video games. Identifying with a violent character of getting a double dose of violence from family conflict as well as media exposure may also increase the negative impact of violent video games. According to research, it was found that the higher rates of violent video game sales related to a decrease in crimes and especially violent crimes. No one knows for sure what these findings mean. It may be that playing video games for hours every day keeps people off the street who would otherwise be getting into trouble. It could be that games provide an outlet that satisfies violent urges in some players, a theory that many psychologists dismiss but that many players believe. Or the two trends may be entirely unrelated. According to a study, at the very least, parents should be aware of what's in the games their kids are playing and think of it from a socialization point of view. What kind of values, behavior skills, and social scripts is their children learning?